Welcome back to Twin Lights Coaching's Marriage Matters. Today we're here with Matthew Brackett, a relationship and leadership coach who specializes in people's relationships with themselves and therefore having a better relationship with others. You know, this show is about marriage and all that matters, and all those matters really, that kind of come with it. And Matthew, you work with couples to help to prepare them for marriage, but also to help them get through the rough spots. And when you look at a couple and you look at who they want to be as a couple, how many of them have actually, even if they're invested 5, 10 years or longer into their marriage, how many of them have really thought about intentionally saying who they want to be as a couple?
Thank you, Mark. I think you've highlighted something that's sort of weak in relationships. And I'm not sure, and we could go into, we can have a debate around what the reasons behind that, but I think people they hop on the train of marriage, they get into a relationship, they court each other, they fall in love, and all that's wonderful and beautiful, but there's not a mechanism in place that helps sit them down and say, all right, what's your project as a couple and as a family? First of all, as individuals, and then as a couple and as family, and then share that with each other. Because often, and that's such a beautiful journey of knowledge of each other. Right, of falling in love with not only with who we are as a couple, but also who we want to be and who you want to be, and so that I, as a spouse, can support you to be that. Right, so there's not a lot of conversations around that, and so people are sort of using the example of a Mexican piñata. They're sort of like blindfolded and sort of whacking at marriage and trying to make it work, and that creates a lot of frustration because. This is so common. People that feel like I'm not the spouse that I would like to be, I'm not the spouse that my spouse expects or needs me to be, or I'm not the parent that I want to be.
Well, I think
all right, well, what are we going to do with that frustration?
I think so much of what that is we put expectations on ourselves and on others, and with those and without really knowing what's coming ahead. So one of the things that you talked about, and I think this is so key, Mark and I talk about this, is building that, creating that foundation, creating a plan. Like, I think back to when I got married. I'm married 24 years. I don't remember anybody sitting me down and saying, what's your plan for your marriage? It was just, I got a ring, I love this guy, we're going to get married and life's going to be great. So when you sit down with couples, and you're right, there's no structure. So they're coming to you, which is fantastic, whether they're young or they're old. How do you help them to create a plan so they're on the same page together to navigate? Let's start with just the young couples, because they come to it just with the whole, again, every rosy glasses, they're so excited, they're in love. But there isn't a plan. There isn't a plan on how they're going to deal with what is it going to be like when they have kids? How do they deal with money together? How do they actually live together? All those things. What kind of work do you do around that to help them with the foundation?
Well, I think it's just creating the conversation. And like I said, Symbis provided me with a very clear roadmap around that, even though the whole part on expectations, on what you saw in your family of origin and what you envision being in the family that you're going to create, right? And oftentimes there's discrepancies there, and so then we talk about that, right? Then there's things that there's just no way, you can't expect people to know what to talk about, right? And so that's why I love assessments, and I love the Symbis, because it creates a lot of great topics that you would never think of talking about, and so it brings a lot of things to the surface. And it's about, and I also work with a lot of business leaders and in their relationships, and so there's so many things in the business world that apply to relationships. So like, would you run your business the way you're running? I was like, oh no, right? And you make a business plan, and that plan has to be, it's a guideline, but it's also flexible, it's fluid, it's dynamic, changes, right? You have to adapt, and if you don't adapt, you're going to lose. And the same thing in marriage. So that's why I would just really encourage people, once a day, once a week, once a month, and once a year to invest intentionally in a relationship. And in the day, it could be just a kiss hello, kiss goodbye, something like that, where I'm doing something intentional. Or your weekly date, your monthly getaway, a yearly retreat, whatever that looks like. But the same way that you invest in business, and that the business depends on that investment of time and energy and focus and intentionality, the marriage needs the same thing.
I love that relationship of business and marriage. We would never run our business without a goal. Our career, we have a goal. As you go through school, you have goals that are put in front of you. But people never step back and say, well, what is the goal of my marriage? What is the project? What is the purpose? And they certainly do it intentionally. And without that forward vision, what is the vision of your marriage? Oh, we're married and we just go through life. But really, you lose the intentionality and you lose that point at which to aim. And I would think that so many couples that you've worked with, I know people that we do, they've lost or they never had that vision. And without that guiding mark, without that target, you don't know where you're going to hit.
Right. I think when you talk about business plan, it can sound very complex. A family and marriage plan, it can be very simple, right? There's very few things that you need as a couple to kind of walk towards, right? And so I think people might get scared by the whole idea of a marriage plan and project, but it doesn't have to be overly complex. It's just, where are we, how are we on the same page together? But we're also different, and how can we support those differences? Right? And what I've come, the whole thing about expectations is so important, because when I speak with individuals and then with the couple, there's a lot of expectations that they aren't talking about because they don't want to hurt, or they don't want to get into an argument or hurt the other. But often, and there's an example I use, again, this is from John Maxwell, is the discouragement or frustration is the distance between expectations and reality, or the ideal and the real. Right? And there's always going to be that tension, and there's a healthy tension in life and in relationships. But when that distance becomes very big, it becomes a very unhealthy tension, which sort of tears us apart.
And that's when you get to those couples that have been married for a period of time and have swept things under the rug, and now they're in this difficult place and they don't know what to do because they haven't communicated, and it's really all about communication. So how do you help a couple that comes to you? I'm sure you do the SYMBIS assessment, but how do you help a couple that's been seasoned, they're maybe 20, 25 years married, and they're in a rough patch, and probably due to lack of communication or expectations that weren't met, or the kids left the house and all of a sudden they're staring at each other and saying, wait a minute, we spent all these years raising the kids, who is this person across from me? How do you help them navigate and get out of the rough waters?
It's for part of it's just facilitating a dialogue. Now, there's levels of rough waters, right? If a marriage is really in crisis and they're ready to kind of pull the plug, then I recommend other programs for that. I think there's 2 points that I take into account when I work with a couple is how invested are you in your marriage, right, in making it work, and how open are you to working on yourself, right, and not fixing your spouse. In other words, it's not about pointing, it's not about blaming, right? So I kind of take those as two filters that I use to see who would be a good fit for what I do with them. But part of it is, resentments and all these hurts and all these pains, they kind of build up over time. And so little by little, let's break those away a little bit. Let's kind of step back and let's look at each other again with love. And it sounds difficult, but I've seen people do it, and then they begin to smile at each other, begin to laugh at each other, and they begin to have fun again in their relationship. It's like, we're sweating the small stuff, and it's really, and usually that's what it is. It's the small stuff that isn't dealt with, and it's kind of, like you said, swept under the carpet. With the young Marines, I would often use the image of, we'd put things in the closet because we don't want to deal with it. Because it's uncomfortable, painful. It's a normal thing that we do as human beings, right? And there's certain things that we can put into the closet and they dissipate. There's other things that we can put into the darkness and they grow. And they can grow over time. And then it's time to kind of, they're no longer fit in there, so we're going to have to take them out and work through them. It's just part of the natural human process.
I have this vision of you're opening the closet one day and everything comes falling out at you. And I think that's what happens when they finally hit that crisis mode. We love what you just said, and I'm saying we because I know Mark will agree, when you talked about asking them to look at each other with love and bring them back to where they once were. Because when you ask a couple, why did you get married? What made you fall in love with the other person? We've seen this on our coaching calls. People will go from angry to, oh, well, and then they'll start with a smile on their face. They start to tell the story of, they were inspiring, they were engaging, they were smart, they were this, they were that. It's amazing how you can switch somebody so quickly to get from that angry place to that place of happiness and joy. I'm not saying it sticks. It obviously takes practice, but we find that it's a great disruptor to just challenge them and say, what started you? Because where you start isn't where you're going to finish. But when you're working with your couples and they're having those difficulties, and you're asking them to look at each other with love, what has been your experience with that?
Well, it can be, I'm going to add a caveat to that, but it can be difficult because people also change over time. Sure. So they can look at each other, this is not the person that I married. Well, yeah, and it's not, because we develop change. Life marks us, there's experiences that we go through. And so, but it's about embracing that, embracing your past, embracing your present, and embracing your present with your past. This is also part of love, right? And so, and that's, I'm saying it very quickly, but there's a whole journey there, right, of understanding where someone's at, what they've been through, and how their history has also sort of marked them into who they are today. And am I capable to love and embrace who you are today? Right? We say that in marriage because it sounds very beautiful, in good times and bad, and sickness and health, right, and all that stuff. But then when the rubber hits the road, it's much more challenging. Right?
They say, going back to the business plan or to the battle plan, what's the first casualty of war? It's the plan. It goes out the window. And when you're in tough waters, and as you said, resentment has built up. Maybe some real unproductive or malignant anger is there. Those are hard things to get past and to diffuse, but they are possible. And if you really understand, as you said, I love what you said, how invested are you in the relationship, and how invested are you in working on you to bring that to the relationship? When we can't change our circumstances, we can change us. And again, a little bit of Viktor Frankl and Nietzsche is, if we look at those who understand their meaning. If you know your meaning, you can sort of work through any why, any how, whatever you need to do. And that's so important, that one question that you asked. That's so huge. So Matthew, we're coming towards the end of the show, but we wanted to ask you, what's one nugget or piece of important information that you would offer to couples about how to strengthen their relationship today?
I would say, I suppose, repeat what I said before about to see how are we as a couple, how are we investing intentionally in our relationship. And there's a lot of things that as life takes us in different directions, and rightfully so, between work and children and all the other duties that we have, but our duty towards each other and to our family, how are we going to invest intentionally in that on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and on a yearly basis?
We love that. Intentions are everything, absolutely everything. So for those who are watching who would like to get in touch with you, can you give them your information?
Yes, you might put something up on the screen, but it's Bracket Alliance. The website, I don't know if it's up yet, but anyways, bracketalliance.com. You can find me on Catholic Life Coaches as well as Matthew Brackett. You can find me on LinkedIn also as Matthew Brackett, and on an email, mjb@bracketalliance.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Matthew. We so appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Each week, we look to bring topics that will help each of you to nurture and to support your relationship, your marriage. We hope that you enjoyed the content today. Matthew is such an amazing light and strong influence to help guide people. For us, if you'd like to reach out to us, please reach out at mark@twinlightscoaching.com. That's mark@twinlightscoaching.com. Or you can find out more about Liz and I and our coaching at twinlightscoaching.com. Until next week, thank you. Have an absolutely wonderful week. Enjoy the beautiful days.
Thanks so much for watching, and thank you, Matthew, for being with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.